Microphones now. Okay, Mr. Mayor.
Ready to go. Good afternoon, Council, Senior Management Team, and members of the public. I see we have quorum for the meeting today, which is a special council meeting to discuss development charge for July 8th, 2019. So approval of, after looking at the agenda, does any councillor have any comments to make? If not, all those in favor? All those opposed? Seeing none.
Do we have a mover and a seconder, Mr. Mayor?
Pardon me?
Do we have a mover and a seconder,
Oh, I'm
Mr.
sorry,
Mayor?
yes, mover and a seconder, there we go. The mover was indeed, I'm sorry, I should have read this, Lisa Hahn, and a seconder was Ron Core. Okay, and everyone was in favor. Is this one?
Disclosure of pecuniary interest.
Oh, yeah, that, let's go down the list here. After looking at the agenda, do any council members have to declare a pecuniary interest in the agenda? Seeing none, may the clerk please note that. Now I read the opening remarks, I believe.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, development charges public meeting for July 8th, 2019. This afternoon, Council is holding a public meeting under Section 12 of the Development Charges Act 1997 as amended. The purpose of the meeting is to give the public an opportunity to ask questions, provide comments, and make representations on the 2019 Development Charges Background Study Update. The study calculates new development charges for wastewater, water, highway-related, fire protection, outdoor recreation, indoor recreation, library, and administrative services. The two components of the development charges bylaw that are proposed to be amended relate to indoor recreation and the definition of farm buildings. Prior to receiving the public comments, we will ask our consultant, Gary Scanlon of Watson and Associates, Economists Limited, to provide a brief presentation of the findings of the study. So now we go to Gary.
Yep, I'll put his presentation up.
Oh, okay. So at this time, we would ask Mr. Scanlon to give us his presentations. Oh, I'm sorry, Treasurer.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, it is Byron Tan that's presenting tonight, so Gary Scanlon couldn't make it tonight.
Okay, very good. Thank you. You, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council, staff, and members of public. Hopefully I can fill in for Gary's shoes for tonight to present the development charges public meeting presentation. So it is a public meeting presentation for the development charges study update, as you've alluded to already. So this is a mandatory public meeting. So we'll just get, I guess, right into it. This, as you've mentioned, that this is a public meeting to talk about the updates to the definitions on farm buildings, as well as we're actually updating the definitions for marijuana production facilities, as well as including the Meridian Community Center, or Pelham Community Center, into the service standards to increase the recovery for the development charges. As I mentioned, the meeting is mandatory under the DCA. And prior to Council's consideration of the bylaw, the study was released prior to the minimum 60 days that is required under the Development Charges Act. So we have adhered to that as well. So the format, as you mentioned, we'll be just discussing the changes to the Development Charges study, which you have just undertaken last year. And then any presentations from the public or questions from Council, I'll gladly answer after this presentation. Just to give you an overview of the timelines and process, we did provide you with a DC background study in 2018. The DC bylaw has been effective as of October 1st, 2018. And through discussions with staff, we had started this process in March and April of this year. Sorry, that should say 2019. We did provide a council workshop on April 23rd to explain to you why we were undertaking this update. And we released the DC background study on May 30th. We are here today, as you see on the timeline, on the public meeting of council, and the draft bylaw is for your consideration on September 3rd. Just to give you a recap of the methodology that we've used in calculating the development charges, it's very prescriptive. We identify the amount, type, and location of growth. We then look at what the servicing needs will be required to accommodate that growth, and then the capital costs of projects that would be needed to service those needs. Once we get those capital costs, we then have to do a number of deductions, such as grant subsidies and other contributions, benefits to the existing community or the existing development. And for soft services, such as outdoor recreation, indoor recreation, and libraries, we must do a 10% mandatory deduction. For the hard services, we don't need to do that. And then any amounts in excess of the service standard calculation, where during the council workshop, if you remember, we do have that ceiling, so we cannot charge above that amount. And any of the DC reserve funds, we must consolidate between the bylaws. If you do have a surplus, we apply that against your capital. If you have, likewise, if you have a negative, we would include that for recovery. And then we divide those costs between residential and non-residential development. We have to do that, it is mandated. You cannot have one type of development subsidize the other, so you must divide it into residential versus non-residential. And then from there, we divide it by the growth that was identified in section 1. Just to give you a recap, the Development Charges Act does provide for mandatory exemptions which must be followed. The first one here is for industrial building expansions. An industrial building may expand by up to 50% without having to trigger a DC. However, we have set up your bylaw in such a way that we have drawn a line in the sand so that this is not in perpetuity. So an industrial building cannot create 100,000 square feet, apply for a 50% expansion to go to 150, and then apply for another expansion to go to 225, and so on. So we have drawn that line in the sand. You may add 2 apartments to a single detached as long as you don't double the size of your home. You may add an additional unit to a medium or high density, so multiple townhouses or apartments without having to pay a development charge. And there's an upper and lower tier government and school board exemption. So if the Region of Niagara or the Catholic school boards or even the public school boards create a building, you can't charge them a development charge. Likewise, if you were to build a building, they would not charge you as well. And then we come to discretionary exemptions. So these are exemptions that council may elect to include or not include. It is all strictly up to council to decide whether you wish to enforce these. And they may reduce the DC in whole or in part for any types of development or classes of development. So you may exempt all of industrial, all of commercial. Likewise, you can exempt a type of development such as churches, or in your case, farm buildings as well. You may phase in the charge over time. If you find the charge is increasing in an extensive amount, the council does have the ability to stage those phase-ins, to have a phase-in so that there would be a minimal impact on a year-over-year basis. However, just remember that any exemptions that you do provide, you must fund through other sources to make the DC whole. So if you do provide an exemption, you must fund it through either taxes or through rates. And lastly, there's the redevelopment credits as well. They are not specific in the Act, but it is from case law. So if a building were to burn down or get demolished, we should have the opportunity within a set amount of time to rebuild without having to pay a DC. Just a quick overview of your existing discretionary exemptions. So as you can see here, they are just carried over from your previous DC bylaw. So you have your Board of Education, so you have your mandatory ones, municipality, or local board thereof. But we also have hospitals, portions of places of worship that are exempt from taxation, a garden suite, farm help house, a farm building. Now that's highlighted because that is one of the exemptions definitions that we are tweaking slightly. And then as well with institutions that are exempt from municipal taxation, such as social housing reform, long-term care, mental health act, and then development from the province or the feds, and a grant, that's a DC exemption for development within the downtown Fenwick and downtown Fonthill, which you are continuing. The current development charges, I apologize, this should actually say effective October 1st, 2018. I'm not jumping into the future here, but you currently are at $17,750. As you can see, I've highlighted the indoor recreation services in yellow because that would be the only item on this list that we are changing for this DC update. And that's currently at $1,206 for single semi, all the way down to $412 for special care, special dwelling units. And then for your non-residential charge, you're at 17 cents for that indoor recreation services. The calculated development charges, having updated your service standards for including your Meridian Community Center, have actually increased to $1,884 for a single detached dwelling. Multiples, which are townhouses, are at $1,342. Apartments are at $1,290. Bachelor apartments and one bedrooms are at $789. And then your special care, special dwelling at $644. And non-res is now at 26 cents. Just to give you a comparison between the two, based on the DC study, as you see, it was at $1,206, and now it's gone up to $1,884. So your overall charge is going from $17,750 to $1,848 because of that change. Likewise, for the non-residential, we're going from 17 cents to 26 on the indoor recreation services, which brings your charges from $8.97 to $9.06. And looking at a survey of your neighboring municipalities within the region, as you can see, the dark blue there is your lower tier charge, which is your charge specifically. That lighter blue on top is the region's charge, and then that sliver of dark slate at the very end, which you could hardly see, is the education DCs. As you can see, you're just with this update, you are moving just slightly ahead of the Thorold Rolling Meadows charge. Likewise, for non-residential commercial, you're really staying within the same ranking. You don't change. You're still underneath Lincoln and Camden. And for the non-residential industrial, you're still at the same level as you were prior to this update study. I'd just like to point out that the region does have a grant program for industrial, so really the lighter blue that you see on there may or may not be applicable depending on whether a grant is applied for. Just to give you a quick update, currently Bill 108 has been introduced by the province back in May, and it has gone through a fairly fast-paced process to reach royal assent back in early June. And what it is the More Homes, More Choice Act. And what they're trying to do is to move certain services, which are the soft services, from the Development Charges Act and move it to a community benefits charge. What that is your development charges basically will only keep your hard services, such as your roads, fire, your hard service related studies, as well as your water and wastewater. Your outdoor rec, indoor rec, and libraries, and then the portion of studies that are related to soft services will be moved to the community benefits charge. And what that does, it actually, we're not sure exactly what the percentage is, but it'll be based on a percentage of the valuation of the property in question. So, for example, if it's a 10% valuation on a $100,000 property, the community benefit charge maximum could only be 10 grand. Now, we're not sure exactly how the framework will be. We're still waiting for the regulations to be finalized. When that time comes, we will provide that to you as a letter that we send out. But really some of the changes are there will be some payments in installments. So part of the change to the DC study is that for any rental housing as well as non-residential developments, they would pay their DCs over 6 annual installments, so over 6 years. For nonprofit housing, as long as they are part of the nonprofit housing umbrella, they would be granted to pay their DCs within 21 annual payments. So it will take you 21 years to recover those DC payments. And when the DC would be calculated, it would be calculated at the building permit stage. The proposed change would have DCs calculated on the date of the application for site plan or zoning amendment. The community benefits charge, as I mentioned, it'll be similar to a DC where you can impose against land to pay for capital costs of facility services and other matters. The services that are in the CBC may not be overlapping with what can be collected under the Development Charges Act. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the amount of the community benefits charge payable shall not exceed the amount equal to whatever the prescribed percentage is of the value of the land as of the valuation date. And then the valuation date will be the day before the building permit issuance. As you see, all money received by the municipality under a community benefits charge shall be paid into a special account. Similar to a DC, you'll have a reserve fund set up for that and for specific use. And the transitional provisions are set out regarding the DC reserve funds and DC credits. So any reserve funds that you currently have under your DC regime, DC bylaw for outdoor, indoor recreation, as well as libraries, there will be a transitional way to move that into your CBC. And just lastly, here's a quick timeline. So as you see, the first reading for Bill 108 was in May 2nd of this year. And it received royal assent in June 6th. Now, for the town of Pelham, it will be in that section 2 where you would pass a new DC bylaw after royal assent, but before the date of the draft proclamation effective date. So what that is you would pass the DC bylaw as it is with the soft services, and as of January 1st, 2020, you have until January 1st, 2021, so a whole year essentially, to draft a community benefits charge bylaw if you want to continue collecting on the outdoor, indoor, and libraries. And the next step would be to pass your bylaw on September 3rd, 2019. Any questions?
Any questions for the presenter? If I may start off, so the payments, it seems like the idea, for some reason or other, instead of having the money paid up front to the municipalities, they're giving these poor developers time to pay the development charge. So, and one of them, I believe, it was up to 21 payments. So is at least the municipality getting interest on those development charges that are owed?
Yes, you do get interest for every annual payment,
I see.
which is almost equal to your indexing.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I guess it's up to the municipality, obviously, to keep track of all this, obviously.
Yes, it is up to your treasurer or that department to have to track all of those. Wow.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Councilor Corr.
In your presentation, you said may add up to 2 apartments for a single as long as size of home doesn't double.
Yes.
So if we're zoned single dwelling homes, they can't put apartment buildings on that.
Well, apartment would be like another bedroom unit within the home. So another unit to it that's attached, as long as you're not doubling the square footage of the existing home.
But through you, Mr. Mayor, in a single dwelling properties in a neighborhood? So
If it's allowable for them.
I'm still not getting it clear.
Yeah, so the zoning would have to allow for dwellings that are larger than a single family, like whether it be a duplex or a triplex or whatever. But if the zoning doesn't allow it, it doesn't apply.
So perhaps we'll let the Director of Planning have a say.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, through you. This is under Bill 108, the new piece of legislation that was just introduced by and passed by the province. So, as you recall, this province's, main thrust around this piece of legislation is to encourage rental housing. And so one of the initiatives was to provide for second dwelling units within existing dwellings. And as a way of encouraging that, they would be exempt from development charges. So our bylaw does permit second dwellings in certain areas, but not all the way across town. But in those areas where a second dwelling would be allowed, then they would be exempt from development charges, provided that second dwelling doesn't double the size of the house.
Okay, thank you.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, do we have a list of what areas in our community that works in, or?
Yes, there are some areas where second dwellings have been permitted through zoning. And then our official plan does provide a policy where they're also allowed in certain areas subject to a zoning bylaw amendment. So some of the neighborhoods where we have permitted second dwellings is in some of the newer neighborhoods, like Rosewood, for example. The zoning that was approved in that neighborhood back in 2013 or 2014 permitted second dwelling units.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, could we get a map indicating where in our community that is allowed?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Not seeing any. We thank you for your presentation. Yes, and motion put forward by Councillor Kaur, seconded by Councillor Hahn. Be resolved that council receive the development charges bylaw overview presentation by Watson and Associates Economists Limited, and that staff proceed with the preparation of a development charges bylaw for consideration by council on September 3rd, 2019. Any discussion on this motion? If not, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carries. Excellent. So now, number 5 on the agenda, presentations by the public. Is there anyone? Is there anyone in the public gallery that would like to make a presentation on this bylaw, proposed bylaw? Going once, going twice, that's all over. Okay, no presentations from the public. Madam Clerk, so yes, we have another resolution. Motion put forward by Councillor Trophy, seconded by Councillor Hahn. That committee receive all written and verbal presentations made by the public for information. Well, being 0. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carries. Correspondence received. We propose development charges bylaw. Do we read this letter or do we just acknowledge it? Madam Clerk?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the clerk's department did receive correspondence, which the clerk circulated to council and to the mayor and staff. I do have that on the record. If you wish not to read it out loud, that's fine. I do have it on the record, but I'll leave that to you.
What do you think, Mr. CEO? Think we should read it or do we just on the
Don't.
record?
I think you should receive that and file it.
Oh, but Councillor Trophy, you would like us to read it?
Oh, it wouldn't hurt.
Yeah. I'm with you. Okay. Overruled, Mr. CEO.
Overruled. First piece of bad advice. Day one.
There you go. So this is a letter that council got from CanTrust Incorporated on the Development Charges Public Meeting, Section 12 of the Development Charges Act. And this is from the solicitors to CanTrust, Inc. This letter is being provided to the municipality as part of the public consultation process relating to the proposed 2019 Development Charges Update Study and the proposed bylaw to amend Town's Development Charges Bylaw 4023-2018. We would ask that this communication be provided to all council members and that it form part of municipal package in respect of the public meeting. We have reviewed both the 2019 Development Charges Update Study prepared by Watson and Associates, as well as the proposed amending bylaw. The bylaw, based on the Watson study, proposes to amend definitions in the town's DC bylaw to exclude marijuana production facilities, including cultivation, from what is otherwise defined as a bona fide farm operation. In our respectful opinion, this is inappropriate and discriminatory. We make these comments for the following reasons set out below. Number 1, appropriate development charge. Cultivation of marijuana is an agricultural use. The proposed bylaw attempts to classify agricultural uses without any rationale or justification and targets only cannabis. There is no consideration or nexus between the proposed amendments and impact on infrastructure. The town has, in the past, indicated concerns with respect to odor and lighting. How this translates to an impact on infrastructure is unsupported. There is no indication whatsoever that the municipality, through its staff or consultant, has considered impacts of equally active vegetable landscape greenhouse operations or livestock operations. In summary, there is no basis to support the proposed bylaw amendments in either the background report or any staff report. The analysis of discussions with staff is not a sufficient justification or background study to support the amendment. Council should be aware that the development charges bylaw for the regional municipality of Niagara defines agricultural use to include the cultivation of marijuana. The only exclusion is with respect to marijuana processing or production facilities. We urge the town to follow a similar balanced approach. And the second item is normal farm practice. Council will be aware that the Farming and Food Protection Act prohibits a municipal bylaw from interfering with a normal farm practice. Cannabis cultivation is an agricultural use. This is clearly reflected in the town's bylaw. Further, cannabis production is an agricultural operation which is protected under the Farming and Food Protection Act. There be no nexus between impact on infrastructure and the proposed bylaw. The singling out of cannabis, it is our position that the bylaw restricts a normal farm practice. We would ask council to take our above comments into consideration and ensure that any amendment to the Development Charges Act is lawful and appropriate. Could you please provide us with any future notice with respect to the town's dealing with this item? And yours truly, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so that was the letter we got. You got that today, Madam Clerk?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I really did.
Okay, so I guess on the advice of the CAO, we will indeed file it. Okay, moving, council, so any discussion on that letter, perhaps? No, no discussion?
Hi.
Oh.
Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes,
This
Councilor.
question be to the Director of Planning. It is considered as a normal farming practice, but we could implement these development charges to them, correct? We were talking about this earlier. Was that?
Mr. Mayor, through you, the imposition of a development charge does not impact a farming practice. It's just an administrative or a charge that is applied, but it doesn't impact how they farm or type of farming that they do.
Excellent. Any other questions, comments?
Through you, Mr. Mayor,
Councilor
to the
Clark.
Director, what impact moving forward would CanTrust have? Any additional, or if their existing properties won't be charged, it's just their expansion? Am I right?
Mr. Mayor, through you, so it would be after this bylaw would be adopted, and when it comes into effect, then any farm building that is used to grow or produce cannabis would be subject to a development charge after that. Currently, CanTrust would be exempt from such charges, but anybody after the bylaw comes into effect, whether it's CanTrust or any other cannabis operator, would be subject to a non-residential development charge for the floor area of their building.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, so if CanTrust builds a new location at a new site, they'll have to pay development charges on their new site.
That's correct.
But at their existing site, even they expand double, they don't pay development charges?
No, if they were to expand, they would be paying a development charge after this bylaw comes into effect.
But then, if you could provide clarity, I thought that it said there that you could expand up to 50%.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, that's for an industrial type of use. Industrial uses are allowed to expand up to 50% and be exempt. The growing and cultivation of cannabis currently in our zoning bylaw is considered to be an agricultural use, so they would not be qualify for that exemption.
Great, thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none, Then I will call the, wait, this is one we got to do, right? Yep.
The comments to close the public
Right,
portion
okay.
of the meeting.
Okay, so we're going to close the public portion. Having heard all the comments, this public meeting is now closed. Council will urge the public to submit their comments in writing prior to Monday, August 19th, 2019. Council consideration of the development charge bylaw is scheduled to occur on September 3rd, 2019. Now, this one.
Yes, that's right, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, motion put forward by Councillor Hildebrand, seconded by Councillor Wink, confirming bylaw. Be it resolved that the following bylaw be read a first, second, and third time and passed. Being a bylaw number 4129, 2019, to adopt, ratify, and confirm the proceedings of Council of the Town of Pelham at its special meeting held on the 8th day of July, 2019. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carries. And motion put forward by Councillor Stewart, seconded by Councillor Wink. Be it resolved that the special meeting of council be adjourned until the next regular meeting scheduled for July 15th, 2019 at 5:30 p.m. I'm sorry.
Mr. Mayor, I think just, it would seem appropriate to introduce our new CAO and welcome him to the town of Pelham. That's David Cribbs, for those people in the gallery as well. So welcome on board.
Now, we will. Special meeting of council be adjourned until the next regular meeting scheduled for July 15th, 2019 at 5:30 p.m. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carries. This meeting is over.